Welcome to episode 31 of The Joy of Writing. I'm your host, Mark Carew. It's a pleasure to talk to Sally O'Reilly, novelist, former journalist and senior lecturer in creative writing at the Open University. In this episode, we discuss Dark Aemilia, a work of historical fiction set in Elizabethan England and starring Aemilia Lanyer, contemporary and possibly more of William Shakespeare. So Sally, I really enjoyed your book Dark Aemilia, which was, I would describe as a really splendid romp in Shakespearean England. It features obviously Will Shakespeare and Aemilia Bassano, or Aemilia Lanyer, who was reputed or thought possibly to be his muse and his lover. Mm-hmm. And in the back of your book, in the notes, you said that you were going to write about Lady Macbeth, then you discovered Aemilia and wrote about her instead. And I wondered, what was the initial attraction to that character and why did you want to write the story?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks for inviting me to talk to you. What really, the start of the novel actually happened sort of prior to that in terms of where I was with publishing, so maybe I can just say a tiny bit about that.
Yeah.
I'd published two books that were sort of contemporary or near contemporary, and I thought that was going to be the beginning of me being an actual proper writer, and there would be no looking back. And what actually happened was I had a change of editor almost as soon as the book was accepted, and once the second book came out, there wasn't going to be further sort of publishing with that particular publisher. And I had to think, either maybe my writing career is now over, because people were going, well, you've got two books out there, what are you worried about? And then I thought, well, no, I actually do want to do something different, sort of relaunch my publishing career, but in a way also relaunch my imagination. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of thought, well, what's another sort of writing that I really like? And, I don't want to write pure genre, like a thriller or something. I don't feel I could do that. And I thought, well, I've always loved historical fiction. I grew up reading Rosemary Sutcliffe and Henry Treece and these kind of people. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking around for a historical subject. And then I alighted on this idea of Macbeth as a subject for the novel, because I'd always really liked that play out of all the Shakespeare. Although I read English at university, the one that I really remember the most vividly was the one I did for my O-level, and I'd also seen the Polanski movie for that when I was 16. And so I started sort of rooting around in the 11th century, finding stuff out about 11th century Scotland, finding out about the actual real Macbeth and his actual wife, who was called Gruach, and they were actually quite a happily married couple and ruled for 10 years in actual historical fact. Shakespeare didn't bother with any of that, as we know. He's not a very accurate historian. Yeah. But I couldn't really bring that alive. I didn't really know how to bring that alive. And so I started thinking more about the Shakespeare version of it, and how this is actually a play that Shakespeare has written in Jacobean London when James I has recently come to the throne, and James I is obsessed with witches and witchcraft. So he's written it to kind of please the king. And then once I started reading about early modern London and Jacobean London, Shakespeare's play world, as it's sometimes called, that became an obsession. So I then started reading around Shakespeare and thinking about this play, and then purely by chance, I was doing a search on my computer one morning. I was sort of Googling around the way you do, and found this woman who was potentially the author of Macbeth. Yes. She was known to Shakespeare. That she was at the court because she was the mistress of Henry Carey. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows if she actually met Shakespeare, but as he was he ran the court players, he would have known Shakespeare. So it's kind of almost inevitable that they would have known each other. And from that, I kind of span out other sort of various academics had said she possibly could have been the Dark Lady who inspired his later sonnets. And I kind of thought, well, supposing she was herself a poet, it would be even more kind of insulting to be the muse of these very sort of angry, erotic, but kind of very negative sonnets. And then, of course, I realised that she was herself a poet. So that the real kind of killer thing is that Aemilia Lanyer was published, I think it was 1611, and she was one of the earliest women to ever be published, as they say, professionally. So she was published by a publisher in the sort of, you know, as a man would be published, with all these dedications at the start. She dedicates it, it's like at the ultimate Oscar speech, to everybody, starting with James I's wife. And I kind of got this, who she just speaks as the Queen. She doesn't say the consort of the king, it's the Queen, as if she was a ruler in her own right. All women. So from that, I kind of thought, because of that kind of background as a writer, she could plausibly have been the person to produce this work. And it was written at a time of plague, so that kind of darkness and horror in the novel comes from what would have been the autobiographical experience of that character of Aemilia Lanyer.
So there was a lot to like, especially in her character and the time she lived in. And so, for example, the plague didn't put you off from writing and making that story world so vivid. And that was one of the things for me about the book, is that it was so vividly shown. I thought it was just splendid in all its glory and all its disgusting squalor and nastiness, and you know, people's grim fight for survival. I mean, on a daily level, not alone the plague. I thought that was terrific. And then to have this very intelligent woman survive as a woman, and also try and take on in a man's world where, you know, she was not going to get recognised for her true talents. I thought it was terrific. I'm just trying to imagine the amount of time and years it would have taken to build such a world. You know, the reading you'd have had to have done, the initial drafts. Can you even put a number to it?
I started writing it when I started off doing an MA at Brunel. This was part of my reinvention of myself.
Yes.
So I think I probably started writing it in 2008, or certainly started reading, and that would be when I was thinking about 11th century Scotland, and it actually came out in 2014. But it probably took me sort of between 3 and 4 years, you know, which actually isn't such a long time, you know, compared to, I think the average time that Sarah Waters talks about is 3 years minimum. I think probably what speeded up the process for me was it was one of the very few periods of my life when I actually was writing full time, which has always been my dream. Yeah. So I think what happened was, once I'd got into, all of the early reading I did about 11th century Scotland, where I was saying to my partner, we've got to go to Scotland, you know, I'm writing this book set in Scotland, and then of course it's all in London. But so that all did feed into it. That was the earliest reading. But once I'd got into reading about, you know, the people who were in London at the end of the 16th and the very beginning of the 17th century, the sort of writing they were writing, you know, I read quite a few extra Shakespeare plays. I read plays by his contemporaries. I could kind of do that all the time. And so it was, in a way, it was a sort of euphoric period as a writer for me, because it meant that as soon as I stopped reading something, I could start writing. And I'm not, I've heard other historical fiction writers who are obviously far more organised than me, mentally and physically. They'll say, oh, we have the research period and that will be a year, and then then it'll be like the first draft will be written, that maybe another year, and then there'll be, I go back and check things against my research files. And I research and write at the same time. I sort of stick post-it notes on books, and then I might write a scene and have 5 books around me, and then sort of cobble something together, and then I'll go back and refine it afterwards. So that period of research didn't entirely predate, if you know what I mean, the period of writing. They really overlapped. I would say probably there was a year where all I did was read. And I would say to anybody writing historical fiction, you probably anything where it's a very research heavy subject, but definitely historical fiction because of the need to do world building. I would definitely say add a year on, before you really feel you can know it. For me, I would always add a year of sort of trying to immerse yourself in this kind of new thing. And another thing I remember discussing with other historical fiction writers that we feel makes us different from historians is that often you're looking for the weird little facts that make you feel as if you are actually there, And again, Sarah Waters talks about buttons and coins, I think, 2 of the things she really likes. And, you want to know if somebody puts their hands in their pocket, do they have a pocket? Of course, you have to check that out first. What do they find in their pocket? You need all the stuff about the big politics and what the culture was. That's part of that early years reading, I think. But then you very quickly need to think about, one thing I did for Dark Aemilia was find exactly how they build a house. She has her house built for her by her lover who's moved on. And I discovered this thing where they would build this sort of single frame house and get the oaks from Kent, and this was a sort of classic way that all of those timber houses were built in London. They kind of almost slotted together. And of course, some of them, they lasted an immense period of time. So the research for that shorter period than other books I've written since. I have another unpublished novel I've written since. But very intense, and I was able to immerse myself. And I think one of the things was because I'd got the character of Aemilia Lanyer, that kind of organised the research for me. I knew I really wanted to know about this person and things emanating out from her. And I think one of the problems when you're researching a new novel is you don't know what you want to know and what you don't want to know. And that can take you down all these avenues. So I kind of had that sort of streamlining piece of information right at the heart of it, which is this is about this woman. So I just need to kind of reinvent the world around her. And that really helped me. Yeah,
you did such a thorough job as well, because I know in your notes you said you wanted to make a time machine to go back to that period, and that seems to be really true. It was things like where you research and then show, and I think showing and not telling us what things were like, but absolutely making it so believable you could touch it and taste it, that type of thing. With things like the medicine, during the plague, the spells, the witchcraft, summoning a demon on 2 occasions, which I thought was terrific. As a fan of Lovecraft, and not much else in the way of occult or horror stuff, but I thought this was great. So I suppose you had so much fun. I don't know how much of all of that you really thought was necessary, as opposed to this will just be tremendous fun to do.
I weirdly did think most of it was necessary. I felt kind of compelled to put things in, like the sort of horror of it, the sort of daily unpleasantness, lack of hygiene, rats on the kitchen table, the sort of sexiness of it, which some people objected to on social media, was because I felt that because the sonnets that were dedicated to her were kind of obsessional, and it's like he's really angry with her, I felt this was born of a sort of a dysfunctional sexual obsession, so I had to put that in, I thought. The thing about the demon partly was I sort of followed the trail. It's a bit like being a detective. I followed the trail regarding Macbeth and became very interested in the fact, of course, actors won't say Macbeth, they call it the Scottish play. Why do they call it the Scottish play?
Yes.
Because they think it's cursed.
Yes.
So I thought, well, one of the things that this story could do would be an explanation of that curse. And the thing about her summoning a demon, there is almost no information about Aemilia Lanyer that has survived. But the historian, who's now a bit of a dated historian, if you can be a dated historian, A.L. Rouse, was the person who first found the notebooks of another character you see in the novel, Simon Foreman.
Oh, yeah.
Simon Foreman sort of fancied Aemilia Lanyer and wanted to sort of get her, to be one of his ladies. He's always had all these various women. And he didn't really succeed. He was trying to kind of lure her in, and in his notes, in his notebook, he put something, Aemilia Lanyer asking me how to summon a demon.
Yeah.
So one of the few pieces of surviving information about this woman is that she went and consulted this person who actually wrote one of the first reviews of Macbeth. That nice synergy there that was written at the time. His reviews survived. So I kind of felt compelled to put the demon in. And again, some people are like, well, I read this book and she suddenly went all Harry Potter on me. Aemilia believes in the occult. She believes it's a world of superstition. It's supercharged with superstition. And therefore, she absolutely will believe in the physical, or maybe physical is the wrong word, but the reality of spirits, demons, evil. It's part of the sort of Catholic tradition that Henry VIII kind of was sort of turning people against, and I felt there was a big trauma there for people that they suddenly weren't allowed to believe in purgatory. A lot of the Catholic sort of traditions were sort of co-opting much earlier pre-Christian traditions, so it kind of was rooted in people's imagination. And this idea about the fact that you could do all these various weird things and summon a demon seemed to be absolutely at the heart of it. Because I'm basically always been a person who wrote realist fiction, and I've got no interest in fantasy whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I just did get into that weirdly, sort of obsessively. You talk about fun. I absolutely loved writing that demon scene.
I thought there was a lot of fun on show there. And some of the medicine, I can't remember that they were making some sort of potion which actually turned into a living thing that writhed and.
The homunculus, yes.
Yeah.
There was lots of literature then and later about the homunculus. And I actually slightly changed that because people were like, well, you're saying he actually did make a homunculus. And I was thinking, I'd have no problem with that, but I had to slightly change it so it's very much through her eyes.
Yeah.
We only see what she sees. There was a sort of tradition among alchemists who were trying to turn base metal into gold. It was almost like the animal or human equivalent to create a living thing out of nothing. And I thought this was a perfect metaphor for the fact that men can't have children, and that maybe the sort of artistic impulse in a man, as some feminists have said, is a sort of, or maybe the impulse to be powerful in the world, is a feeble, substitute for having children. And so I kind of really loved that as a sort of crazy way of sort of embodying that sense that men can't have children, therefore they have to do all this other stuff,
Like write books.
Like write books, like be William Shakespeare.
This is very interesting. I think in a future episode we will talk about why writers write. Because it can't be for the fame and glory, as that's very thinly spread. That's really interesting. Yes, what is the creative urge? Is it a sublimation for trying to have a child? That's really interesting. You mentioned Simon Foreman, and I was flipping through another thing about the book, it's terrific dialogue and some old words now forgotten, but which are fantastic. Like, I've just written down a few, like doxy. So Aemilia sort of chastises herself for being a mistress or a prostitute, and Simon Foreman has a fantastic word for fornication, which was halic. I think that's the verb or the noun.
Yes.
breasts are Doug's, and there's all sorts of other things going on, and some people will like it and some people will not.
I love doing that. I absolutely loved it. And Halleck is a word that is all over Simon Foreman's diaries and notebooks. Right. And I'm not sure that other people even used that word. You know, it might have been because he was a sort of pretty out there character, that he might have coined that word himself. I've got a sort of a bit of a I don't really agree with some of the sort of current sort of norms about writing historical fiction of a certain sort. So there's a sort of mainstream historical novel. Some writers are doing all kinds of things with historical writing, you know, and going off in all sorts of directions. But in the kind of mainstream sort of commercial area, one of the sort of norms seems to be to use modern English when you have, you know, the dialogue is often in what seems like modern English pretty much. And my great inspiration in that area is, well, two people, Sarah Waters and Hilary Mantel. Hilary Mantel gets around it by, she uses extremely simple language. It's very pared down, but it feels absolutely right, you know, as everything I'm talking about the Wolf Hall books. Everything in the Wolf Hall books seems utterly compelling. Like, this is how it actually was, you know. You've read the other Tudor books. This is how you're basically walking around with Thomas Cromwell here. And the other person was Sarah Waters. And the start of Fingersmith, she has a scene between these various kind of villainous types by the river in this kind of low dwelling. And it's an almost exact hybrid of Dickens and EastEnders. That's how I felt when I read it. You know, you felt it was absolutely now, but it absolutely felt like the 19th century. And in writing the Dark Aemilia dialogue, I think Georgia Hare was reputed to use only language that would have been used at the time. You know, a writer who's now seen as one of the sort of precursors of what Hilary Mantel calls chicklet with wimples. You know, she's seen as a very lightweight writer, but actually she was a very dedicated historical fiction writer, so she only used actual words that were used at the time. I didn't do that. I had this attempt to do a hybrid Sarah Waters-esque, combining what I felt like the rhythms felt sort of like this was how people would naturally speak, but loads of the words, you know, I picked out from contemporary writers and records, so that I could use this you know, words that we've now forgotten, which I put in the glossary at the back. I even put in some words. This is how much fun I was having, that Aemilia made up herself, which is kind of ridiculous. But so basically that I made up. But I did get really into that, and I love the fact that another Hilary Mantel thing, you know, there's the history that's survived, there's the history that we understand as being history, and of course there's a lot of debate about that at the moment, and there's so much which is hidden and lost and forgotten, and so a historical fiction writer writing in the gaps can own what's there. And so in Dark Aemilia, it's very much those back streets of London, the women who aren't at the court, you know, almost all of the people in London at that time, everything they said and thought is unrecorded. So I was trying to get that sense of, say you could walk around the streets, what would it sound like?
She starts with a very erotic and sexy affair with Will. Inevitably she becomes pregnant, and I was just thinking, hang on now, she must become pregnant soon. And I turned the page and there she was pregnant. So she is with child. Hunsdon knows what to do in these cases, builds her a house, marries her off to the wonderful Alfonso, the recorder playing fool, who I think he was just a lot of fun, a gambler, a sot, would steal her money to go and gamble some more. And so Aemilia is on her own looking after Henry, who at least is born safely. And she must find out what to do. And then we get on to her. She's come down in status, as it were, a little bit, or a lot. I mean, she's rather poor now, although she does have a servant, doesn't she? She has Joan Daunt, who was the apothecary, who burnt down her own shop, spoiler alert, just giving that away, so that she could sort of try and be a companion, because she realised that Aemilia was worth staying with. Was Joan historical, or was that an invention?
Joan's fictitious. There's a few characters who are fictitious. Alfonso is absolutely that she did marry her cousin. He's real. He was a recorder player. I have to say that I kind of saw the recorder like my kids playing it at school or something, this terrible noise. The recorder is actually a very respected Elizabethan instrument. So it wasn't really fair on the recorder, but it seemed like a big letdown. Joan Daunt I put in because she sort of brings in, and you're talking about show not tell, she kind of shows the witchcraft tradition, and it's a very different tradition than the tradition that James I was interested in. So at that period, they're kind of starting off. They hadn't quite got to the sort of black hats and flying on broomsticks, but they were on the way to that. And he wrote this demonology all about it. Joan Daunt is in the tradition of folk knowledge, understanding nature, providing cures, and this is what she did in her shop before she herself was accused of witchcraft. She's kind of like, she represents, and also it was very common for people who weren't particularly well off to have one servant, but for that servant to be much more like a friend. And much later on in the sort of Victorian sort of world, where they were very good at hierarchies, the Victorians, that's when you get a much stronger sense of knowing people in your class, and some people are your inferiors. They didn't have that same sense. They did obviously have a sense of hierarchy overall, the king and the nobles being superior to other people. But when you were in a household with people, it was much more of a sort of egalitarian bond. So I brought her in as this kind of, I hesitate to say sidekick, because Joan isn't very much of a sidekick character. She's quite formidable, but she is an ally for Aemilia. So there were certain people that I brought in with the sort of smaller roles, where, because nothing's known about what happened beyond these few notes that Simon Thornton's got, I needed to flesh out who would be in her house and who she would know in that period of her life.
Yeah, I mean, she was a strong character, as you say, and fascinating, the folk medicine she was involved with. And as a scientist and interested in biology, I was always interested in just exactly how and what was available to cure or even treat some of the awful problems they had. And there was nothing more awful than the plague, which turns up, and Henry succumbs. Her son, how old is he in this story at this stage? 10, 11, 12 or something?
He's about 10, I think. I had to sort of think he's about 10, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then, I mean, Aemilia will do absolutely anything for Henry.
Yes.
That's the number one priority in her life. She goes to see Simon Foreman, prepared to do whatever is necessary.
Yes, finally.
Although that never happens.
Yeah.
I don't think. And then it was him who led her down the basement steps to see his underground laboratory, which is terrific. Really creepy scene. I love that. But then she comes up with a brilliant plan of summoning the demon Lilith, who will save her child, and all that comes about. I mean, terrific stuff. For plotting, was there any problem with? Oh, not problem, but was plotting easy? Was it just like one thing led to another?
Relatively. Other books I've written have been worse to plot.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, when you have different children, they have different. Some bits go better than others. The thing about having her life was really helpful, because that was the frame, that she would be that's the core person, so that's good. One of the problems was that the thing with Henry and that whole plague section, in a way, was so climactic. It was quite difficult to really, because the whole sort of function of the plot was to head towards the creation of Macbeth, which does arise from this plague sequence.
Yes.
But the plague sequence was so intense that I had a bit of a problem then sort of recalibrating things towards, can we get enough intensity towards what is the actual climax, which is this performance of Macbeth. And I think eventually I got there, but that took me quite a while. I had a kind of a sort of a period where I was sort of rewriting that final section because I was worried that I'd kind of thrown everything at the plague sequence, and I was thinking, how can I get it back? Another thing that I didn't have in the actual Aemilia Lanyer had she did have a child called Henry, who's almost certainly not Shakespeare's son, but the son of Henry Carey, obviously. But she also had a daughter with Alfonso who died as a child, as a baby.
Okay.
And in the first drafts, I put that in. And then when I was trying to think about the plot, it's this thing about using a real story and also writing a story that's satisfying for the reader. I thought we don't need to have the baby in there. And it's because of the emotions around Henry, to have another loss, or, you know, she nearly loses him. I just felt, and also I had feedback from the agent I had then that the story was much too dark, you know. So one of the things is people saying it's too dark. And so another thing I did with the plot was the original, without giving away the ending, the original ending was much bleaker. She's in a similar situation, but I signed off at a much bleaker place. Whereas for this version, I suddenly had this idea of the first play that's staged after his death being a kind of momentous thing. I think of all the other times of Shakespeare plays being performed since he died, and this is the first one. That struck me as a very good place to go. So it was a case, sometimes it was a case of looking at things that really happened and thinking, yes, I can use that. Like I used the idea that Shakespeare got burned in a play at the when the Globe burned down. I used that. That's somebody else's idea. It's not even a historical fact, but it is credited in the notes. But sometimes you have to look at what's really there and think, no, imaginatively, and in terms of the balance of the story, I need to simplify this here. So I need to kind of leave that out. So it was that thing. When I'd finished it, I sort of thought, I'm not sure if I want to write about real historical figures again, because of that thing about that balance. It gives you that information, which is great, but sometimes you're trying to square the circle because you're worried about not being sufficiently accurate. Like I felt like, oh dear, when I mentioned not using the baby, I thought, oh my God, maybe I should have used it. You know, you feel this sense of some sort of obligation towards the actual person.
Yes, it was a bit like your time machine or TARDIS has landed in this fantastic world, and you don't really want to move on. But you feel, well, I actually do have an obligation to get to the end of the episode, or actually to the end of the book, and try and give something satisfying to the reader.
And one of the things about Macbeth, I read this article by Terry Eagleton, the Cambridge scholar, about the fact how unusual it was to have the witches on the stage at the very start. You would usually have some kind of martial figure, you know, the king or somebody, or if it was a chorus, it wouldn't be women in that tradition. I mean, possibly much earlier, you know, in Greek times or whatever, that might have been the case. But in the revenge tragedy tradition, you would not have women at the start. You would not have witches. So Shakespeare gives the witches this really central part. So even the actual play itself has got women, right? Or, you know, are they women? These kind of weird hags. And they go unpunished. All of the sort of re kind of calibrating at the end of the play. The witches are nowhere. The witches are kind of, you know, they're sort of too powerful, really. That's the sort of sense. They're somewhere else. And or their power is derived from something that men can't control. So although I'm not one of these people who thinks Shakespeare didn't write his own plays, in my real self, I believe that it was Shakespeare who wrote his own plays. But I really liked the idea that this female principal could be in the play because the actual author was a woman. You know, that just seemed to fit.
Yes, and that there were elements in the story where a strong feminist strand certainly comes through. I like that idea, and certainly with the witches, even though it's a supernatural element which grabs the audience attention immediately, but it's also because they utter the prophecy, which kind of like kicks the whole play off, and you'll always refer to it and say, why are we doing this again? Oh, it's because of the witch's prophecy. Oh, I see.
But I wanted to sort of dramatise the other sort of agency that women had, which is behind the scenes, in the streets, through, and this thing about magic and superstition seemed to me to be very much what you do when you're pushed out of the sort of official lines of communication. You can do something, and you can play on people's fears, however dignified somebody appears, everyone's scared of death. So women have this kind of sexual power, and they have this kind of power over emotion. And I kind of wanted to sort of offer a sort of dramatisation of that through Emilia's point of view. And another scene I really liked writing was the deathbed with Elizabeth, where in fact Elizabeth at that point is weak, and there's some brilliant descriptions at the time written about how she lay on those cushions. All of that was based on witness description. She lay on these cushions on the floor. She was obviously dying, but nobody was admitting to she was dying. She still was wearing her robes, her fantastic clothes. And I like the fact there that Elizabeth's having to sort of acknowledge her frailty finally. The woman who somehow managed to keep, to be a monarch in every sense is now going. So that again had a sort of feminist agenda, I suppose. And she recognises in Aemilia another misfit, and another person who's going to have to use devious means to stay afloat, but obviously in a very different social position. So that was all part of this kind of feminist idea I had, with a sort of, a small f kind of feminism, almost counterculture that women had, because that was all they could have. That's where their agency lay.
Such a nice trip in the time machine to that period of history. Fascinating characters, fascinating subjects. Thank you, Sally, very much indeed.
Thank you very much. It's been really, really good to talk about it.
In the next episode, I'll be talking with Sally again about reaction to Dark Aemilia. We will also discuss the idea of writing as a way of being, and what one can expect from life as a writer.